To welcome Diego Rey to the NIH Digital Health Info Session. We will be discussing does someone want or need a specific digital health innovation? So Diego has some great expertise and experiences. So Diego, could you please introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here. By way of background, I was a co-founder of a company called GeneWeave Biosciences in the infectious disease diagnostic space. Prior to that, I was doing a PhD in biomedical engineering focused in microbiology at Cornell University, and ended up co-founding GeneWeave while in grad school, spinning it out of Cornell. And what we did at GeneWeave was develop tests for detecting and identifying bacteria and targeting the right antibiotic therapy to patients. And went to the classic Series Seed, A, and B rounds of financing. The company was eventually acquired by Roche in 2015. And then I was at Roche for 2.5 years before stepping down, and then joined Y Combinator after Roche as their first life sciences visiting partner, which is come and be a partner until you figure out your next thing. YC had over 200 life sciences companies at that point, and now I think they're over 350. And so I was there to help all those companies. And then I figured out the next thing, which was to start Endpoint Health, the company I'm working on now, with the same co-founders from GeneWeave. Got the band back together, and we're working on precision medicine therapies for critical care.
Excellent. And so regarding your experience at GeneWeave, how did you, we're talking about identifying that use case and doing two things, doing the research and then also finding that scalable use case. So how did you identify a scalable and economically sustainable use case as you were doing the research and also being a founder of a company and developing this technology? And the other part of that question is, did you use, we were talking about customer development and design sprints, did you use any of those sorts of techniques like customer development or design sprints as you built your company up?
Yeah, we definitely did, but I have to say that we stumbled into it. We realized somewhat after the fact that there was a framework for this that we wish we caught on to a little bit earlier on. This was 2007, 8, 9. We formally launched or got financing for the company in 2010. And so during that early period, we were literally stumbling our way through this process. And then ended up, in retrospect, really doing what I see now with the customer development process. It's more formalized, and so we did exactly that. We honestly started actually a little bit too focused on what the technology could do, and so we were in thinking of what is the biggest problem that, based on this technological capabilities, that we can go after. And landed initially on thinking that we would develop a diagnostic test for tuberculosis. And the reason for that was thinking, well, that's the biggest problem we can think of. Areas that are endemic are very resource limited. You need a test that's inexpensive, that has a rapid turnaround time, and so on. And so it basically gave us parameters that would define almost an idealized test, essentially. To attempt to solve a very big problem, and along the way, though, we realized that although it made sense that this tech was well suited for a problem like that, as a startup, it wasn't the best place to start. It was something that was difficult to finance through venture financing, and so we ended up pivoting essentially in terms of not the technology, but what product we were going to develop.
And so how did you determine that sort of, it sounds like almost a customer development process. How did you end up learning that you should pivot kind of your approach?
Yeah, so it was interesting because it was customer development kind of on two fronts. One was the end user of our product that we would develop. But then the other one that caused us to really do the pivot was this idea that we needed to finance this company. And so it was, you could think of it as customers, but it was customers of our equity. It was customer development of the investors, and so by talking to both those groups, we ended up realizing, okay, well, where else can our technology solve problems? and where are there problems that can make for early stage financing from VCs. And so what we ended up focusing on instead of tuberculosis as a starting point was maybe a common area these days is MRSA detection. So this was a same fundamental issue in terms of looking for a bacterial organism that's in some cases multi-drug resistant, and but in a problem that was endemic globally and still a big clinical and financial problem in the U.S. and Europe, and in areas where early stage VCs feel more comfortable tackling as an initial area. And so I guess that the lesson there that was kind of interesting was that there was customers were end users, but we also needed to build a venture-backed company, and so we thought of VCs as customers of our equity, essentially.
I see. And how did you start to understand how this new kind of pivot fit into the ecosystem? Did you go and observe how these sorts of tests would be conducted, like full life cycle? What was the approach there?
Yeah, so that was the other thing that made it a little bit easier working in MRSA, is that this is something that, tuberculosis is hard in many ways, not only because of the areas, again, where it's endemic, but it's a biosafety level 3 organism and so on, a little harder to work with. And so with something like MRSA, we can visit local hospitals. And what we did was literally follow the sample. We would go and see, okay, where is the sample being collected, by who, where does it sit after that? Who picks it up? Where does it go next? What happens when it gets to the clinical micro lab? How it's accessioned? How it might be batched together, and depending on the workflow in the hospital, or run stat, et cetera. And we learned a ton in that process. And so we had preconceptions about, okay, well, we think this test should be like this. Why? Because, and again, it was motivated mostly by what can this technology do? But by following that sample and the needs of the various individuals involved, all the way from patient to clinical lab technician, we learned a ton about, okay, well, really, how should this product look like to solve this entire problem?
Excellent. And I guess just for the group now, were there any final lessons learned, takeaways from running through this exercise of building from research to technology to acquisition and use in patients?
Yeah, I think the fundamental lesson learned was kind of a point I brought up a couple of times, which is this idea of thinking a little bit too much initially on what can this tech do, to defining the problem and solving it. And the surprising part about this lesson was that in the end, we were getting too complicated. Essentially, it turned out to adequately solve the real problem that we were going after. The technological approach ended up being way simpler than what we envisioned, and so we were making kind of life a little hard for ourselves in trying to really squeeze all the technical power out of our capabilities that our tech could enable. At first, it felt a little bit like we were leaving something on the table, but in the end, it turned out that a simpler solution that encompassed some of the technical capabilities of our fundamental technology was the way to go and solve the problem really well, even though we weren't doing all the things that the tech could really do. So it was a bit surprising in the end. It actually was really enabling, because it facilitated then later product development. There was less things to optimize and so on. So it all helped out a lot. And it all started with really kind of fundamentally understanding what the problem, how the problem really needs to be solved, by getting in there, where the product would be used and who would be using it.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us and discussing your experiences. I hope this will help some of these teams to build also impactful products as well. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks.